Hello everybody. I hope that your week is going well. I am going to do a video on how to use law of cosines to find the angle measurements in this triangle. Now the reason that we have to use law of cosines in this example instead of law of sines is because we are only given the sides of the triangle. We're not given any angle measurements. Another situation when we need to use the law of cosines is when we are not giving an angle and its corresponding side. Law of sines is a proportion, and so we have to have those that angle and that side in order to use law of sines. But the good news is that we also have a law of cosines that we can use when we don't have that proportion, and it is from the Pythagorean theorem. So you will see a lot that looks like the Pythagorean theorem. And I am going to write this down for us to get started on this one. So I have a squared for this problem that we're going to use. I have a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc times cosine of a. And a few things just to look at. Here I've got a squared, and over here I've got the cosine of that angle. The other thing that I want you to be aware of is I have b squared and I have c squared, and then here I've got negative 2 times b times c. Now you can use a formula sheet. I would certainly encourage you to have a lot of those in this problem. We are given the length of each side, so I'm going to go ahead and write that down. For A, I've got 65 is the length of the side. For B, I've got 47. And for C, I've got 51. Okay? And so, again, we don't have a proportion here. We don't have an angle and its corresponding side. So that is why we are using the law of cosines and not the law of sines. Once we get our first angle, we can use the law of sines. But initially, we're going to have to use the law of cosines. So I have picked this angle right here. I'm gonna find angle A. That's what I want to find. So now I'm going to plug these numbers into my law of cosine. So my A value is 65, so I've got 65 squared. My B value is 47, so I have 47 squared. My C value is 51. And then I've got minus 2 times 47 times 51. And that is multiplied times the cosine of A. Now, we don't have the cosine of A. And so that is actually what we are trying to find, is the cosine of A. Now, I'm going to do some algebra on this page. Then I'm going to show you your keystrokes on the next page. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to subtract these two values, 47 squared and 51 squared. That 51 should be squared. So what I'm going to have is 65 squared minus 47 squared minus 51 squared. And that is equal to negative 2 times 47 times 51 times cosine of A. Okay? Now, my next step is going to be to divide by all of this right here. Negative 2 times 47 times 51. I am going to divide by that. And I'm going to divide both sides. So I have negative 2 times 47 times 51. Okay, so I have negative 2 times 47 times 51. So the cosine of A is equal to 65 squared minus 47 squared minus 51 squared over negative 2 times 47 times 51. Okay, so now that we have solved for the cosine of A, I want to talk a little bit about keystrokes on your calculator. Now, when you take your final, you'll have access to your calculator. You will have access to the calculator inside of ALEC. You can also have access to a calculator that of your choosing, you can have access to whatever calculator of your choosing. Some students like a graphing calculator, some students like a scientific calculator. My advice to you is probably to use the ALEC calculator. I think it's a good calculator. I like it. You've got to be okay and you've got to be comfortable with the calculator. And that's the thing that I want to make sure is that you are comfortable with the calculator. So what I've done here is I have the calculator. I have what you need to type into the calculator, and then I have the answers. I want you to notice that it's super, super important that you use these parentheses. You have to tell the calculator what to do. And if you don't tell the calculator what to do correctly, then you're not going to get the correct answer. And so you may have done the algebra correct, you may have done the work correct, but if you don't tell the calculator how to process your answer, then it's not going to be correct. One of the habits that I encourage students to do is to go ahead and get used to putting the numerator and the denominator in parentheses. You're not going to go wrong with that. So I could even have a parentheses down here as well. And I think that's a completely reasonable thing to do. You're just not going to go wrong with that. You know, you ran into it with your logs and when you were solving exponential and logarithmic equations, and you run into it again with trig. So be super careful about that. The first thing that I'm going to do, sorry about that. The first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to hit a parenthesis. So that is going to be the first thing that I hit when I am inputting this. Then I'm going to hit the 65. So I'm going to hit those next, and then I'm going to hit the square button. Okay, and then I subtract, and then I go to the 4 and the 7. Okay, and then I subtract again. So I hit the subtraction button, and then I hit the 5 and the 1 for 51. So I think I didn't square the 47. So be sure that you do square the 47, and also be sure that you square the 51. So just make sure those keystrokes are accurate. I've got too many numbers on there now. And then this is super important that you have closed that parenthesis. So be sure that the numerator has a parenthesis around it, because you definitely want to be sure you are telling your calculator to do what it is that you want it to do. Because the denominator is all multiplication, and because this calculator has put everything in the denominator, you are okay if you don't for this one, but it's still a good idea to put that denominator in as well. Now, once you have this in your calculator and you hit equal, you are going to get this number right here. Okay, 0.12202753442. What that is right there is the cosine of A. So our cosine of A equals this number that we got, 0.12202, and it keeps on going. In order to find the angle measure for that, you have to hit the inverse of cosine. And this is your inverse of cosine button right here. And once you hit that, it's going to put this number inside parentheses. So your next step is going to be to hit this equal to. And that gives you your angle measurement. And our angle measurement for angle A is 83 degrees. So I want you to realize that your keystrokes on your calculator are as important as the algebra that you are working out. So don't hesitate to be super aware of that. Now, I'm going to go back to this picture right here because we have found the angle measurement for A. So we have the angle measurement of A at 83 degrees. So our angle measurement for A is 83 degrees. Now what we have is we have a relationship between an angle and its side. So we can use that relationship using law of sines. And that's what I have set up here. I have sine of 83 because I just found out that that is angle A. So this is the sine of angle A. 83 is our angle A. Okay, and 65 is the length of our side A. Okay, so I have a relationship there, a proportion. Because I have that proportion, I can now use the law of sines. So now I am trying to find the measure of angle C, and I have put the measure of side C in my proportion there. So what happens then is I cross multiply, and I get sine of 83 times 51, and that is equal to sine of C. Sorry about that, I misspelled sine. My brain got a little ahead of myself. So I've got sine of C times 65. Okay, so when I divide, again, I have the sine of 83 times 51 divided by 65, and that is going to be the sine of C. Okay, now I have 51 times sine. These are interchangeable, so you're fine on that. So don't, I know that I wrote 51 times sine of 83 here, and then I have 83 sine of 83 times 51. So a multiplication property allows us to do that, and that's okay. Be sure you've got your parentheses. That's super, super important. I just want to point out here, we have a parenthesis that closes the angle measurement for the sine, and then this parenthesis closes the numerator. So you do have a double parenthesis right there. So be careful with that. And then I'm dividing that by 65. When I do that, I get that the sine of C is 0.7787. Okay, I've got to, once I have that calculation, I've got to hit inverse sine. So be sure you're hitting the right inverse. I was working on a problem the other night, and I was doing the law of sines, and I hit cosine. And so I got the wrong answer because I hit the wrong inverse. So when you're in law of sines, be sure you're hitting the inverse. And when I do that, I get an angle measurement of 51.1. Okay, and since I now have the angle measurement of 2 of my angles, I can use subtraction, and I can find that my last angle is 45.9 degrees. Okay, and so this is an example of how you use law of cosine first, and then you're able to use the law of sine, and then it helps you a little bit with your angle or your calculator keystrokes. So I can't reiterate enough, as we are closing in on the end of the semester or the end of the term, how important it is to really make sure you understand how to use that calculator. And I'm as happy to talk to you about your calculator as I am anything else. So don't hesitate to let me know.